All right, welcome back to the Elias Macko Show. Now, we have been told for years, even decades, that recycling is good for the planet, but could there be potential harm in recycling? A study that was released back in February shedding light into how the plastic waste crisis may be a decades-long campaign of fraud and deception about the recyclability of plastics specifically. Let's go to Davis Allen, investigative researcher at the Center for Climate Integrity. It's based in Washington, D.C. Davis, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on.
Looking at the study, here's what the report is called: the fraud of plastic recycling. Those are some big words. Tell me about that. What is the fraud of plastic recycling?
Yeah, well, the fraud really comes into play when we look at the major discrepancy between the way that the industry was talking about plastics recycling internally versus the way they were presenting it to the public. Internally, it was pretty clear, over the course of many decades, that plastic recycling didn't really represent a viable solution to all the plastic waste that was being produced. What it did present the industry with was an opportunity to, convince the public that it was a sustainable material, that there were solutions for all of that waste, and, avoid potential harms to the industry, potential bans, regulations on plastic materials, that sort of thing.
So you're talking about, when you buy a soda, let's say, at the convenience store, and that plastic bottle, they've got some sort of green logo that says, this is recycled, it will be recycled, and you kind of sort of get to feel good about buying that soda.
Right. Yeah. The idea that, we're constantly surrounded by plastic materials, especially packaging and single-use plastics are, part of our day-to-day lives for all of us. They're impossible to avoid. And so using all of that plastic, knowing that, basically best case scenario for that material is a landfill and worst case scenario is ending up in the ocean or something, it makes us feel better when we use the plastic to imagine that it's likely to be recycled. But the reality is, it really isn't. And the industry has understood that for a long time.
Okay, so why don't you tell listeners what is happening? And I've had growing concern when I'm at home and I take a piece of single-use plastic, a container of food or whatever, and I put it into my recycling. I'm sort of feeling I'm not doing anything here. In 2024, the majority of the time when we throw a piece of plastic into recycling, what then happens to that plastic?
Yeah. So for the vast majority of plastic products that are in your recycling bin, they'll probably go to a facility where they sort out the materials that are most likely to be recycled. Aluminum cans are sort of the best, product that's recycled the most often. Cardboard and paper, glass are all recycled pretty frequently. And there are a few plastic items that they'll look for that have the highest rate of being recycled. But otherwise, most of that material is getting sort of sorted out, and then it's a little bit of a question mark. Best case scenario really is that it ends up in a landfill, because the alternatives are ending up in an incinerator or ending up in the environment somewhere.
Okay, so you say best case landfill. What about when they take the plastic, they shred it up, and they turn it into a new bottle or a fabric or something? What about, isn't that the best case?
Well, yeah, I mean, so there are, some plastic products that do get recycled. The recycling rate has never been very high. I'm not sure about the Canadian rate, but in the U.S. right now, it's between 5 and 6% of the plastic waste that's produced may get turned into, like you say, a bottle might get turned into carpet or the lining of a coat or something like that. So that is an advantage. That's like a pretty good use in some cases. Unfortunately, mechanical recycling comes with its own, downsides as part of that process. In particular, it really exacerbates the microplastics issue. A lot of microplastics, which are obviously a major concern right now, are produced through the process of mechanical recycling.
Okay, we need to talk about this.
But,
I want to
but
dive into this, Davis. What you just said there.
yeah, sure.
That the
Sure.
majority of microplastics. I mean, we're all losing our minds over microplastics, right? They're finding it in the testicles. They're finding it everywhere in our bodies, right? Are you
Yeah.
saying that plastic recycling is a major contributor to that?
Yeah, that's what recent studies have found, that it's a major contributor, and it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, ultimately, mechanical recycling, the process is taking these plastic products and grinding them up into tiny little pieces, and then, melting them back down. But through that process, a lot of microplastics are created, yeah.
So listen, Davis, I'm in Montreal, right? You have our baseball team. I hope you're enjoying it. So in Montreal and in our city, we have enacted a whole bunch of types of bans on certain types of single-use plastic. Here's my concern. Tell me how off base I am, because I'm just a dumb radio host, okay? So first we banned shopping bags, right? Single-use disposable shopping bags. Here's what's happened in my personal life. Since we banned single-use shopping bags, I now have to buy, for the first time in my life, I spent my whole life not buying garbage bags because I would just use my grocery bag for my garbage. Now I have to buy garbage bags for the first time ever. I now have to have these reusable shopping bags that, to be honest, they pile up in my place. I either get them from somewhere, I order something, I get a new one that's delivered to me, I forget I have to buy a new one. And then I look at studies that say, one reusable plastic shopping bag is equivalent to 500 or 1,000 or 10,000, depending on the material of those single-use shopping bags that I was reusing anyways. So I look at that and I go, oh, man, are these bans actually worse at the end of the day? If we should try and limit, right, our use of plastic, but these may be increasing actually the usage of plastic, these bans.
Yeah, I think that situation speaks to the complexities of, sort of a one-off approach to plastic regulation. You attempt to have a positive impact by targeting, one particular use. But again, the reality is that plastics are so pervasive in our lives that sort of that approach is just almost destined to fail. I think in general, it will almost inevitably, mean replacing one plastic product with another. And I think really speaks to why we need to take a higher level approach, think more broadly about shifting away from the level of plastic production that we have, putting caps on production at the highest level, and also shifting away from disposable products in many cases where we can. Plastics have been so cheap, and the plastics industry has been so effective at inserting them into so many aspects of our lives that it's really facilitated a sort of disposable lifestyle. And ultimately, that's never really going to be sustainable, whatever the specific kind of plastic product you're using.
Can I ask you, is there an example where you just scratch your head and say, why are we still using plastic for this? Because in my mind, for a lot of things, I still think plastic makes the most sense. Like, let's say the beverage the soda you buy at the store, right? If they switched it to a glass bottle, glass is heavy, right? Like glass is really heavy, and that takes energy, right, to transport that around. Sometimes I feel something light, like a plastic bottle, maybe there's advantages there. Is there something that you just say, my goodness, why do we still use single-use plastics for this?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those uses are, we look at like packaging that just didn't exist before. And again, because it's so cheap, it's become easy to use plastic in all these different ways. But I mean, I walk around the grocery store here and I see all kinds of items where I just think that really doesn't need to be in a plastic bag. There's not really a benefit. I buy 3 bell peppers and they come in a clear plastic bag rather than, grabbing them off the shelf, or some packaging has, a clear plastic window sort of to see the product even though I know what it looks like inside. A chips bag could easily be made of paper, and many of them are. But you look around, and the vast majority are made out of plastic. Really, once you start to look for it, I think especially
everywhere.
in the grocery store, but in all sorts of places, you just see plastic that probably doesn't really need to exist, just all over the place.
Davis, I have to wrap up. I really enjoyed our discussion here. Very eye-opening about plastics. Hopefully we can talk again in the future. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Davis Allen is investigative researcher at the Center for Climate Integrity, which is based in Washington, D.C.